There are some stories that should never be told. Some secrets that should remain buried in the frozen ground of forgotten places. But I can't sleep anymore. Haven't slept properly in months, not since I found those journals. Not since I learned what really happened to the Coldwater family in that godforsaken corner of Illinois. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I inherited more than just property when my great-uncle Edmund passed last winter. The old man left me his estate, a sprawling piece of land near what used to be called Coldwater Township. Most folks around here won't even speak the name anymore. They cross themselves and change the subject when you bring it up. Now I know why. It started innocently enough. I was going through Edmund's belongings, sorting through decades of accumulated papers and photographs, when I found the leather-bound journal hidden beneath the floorboards of his study. The leather was cracked and stained, the pages yellowed with age. The first entry was dated March 15, 1836, written in a careful, educated hand. Today we broke ground on what will be the finest well in all of Illinois. The water here runs pure and cold, deeper than any man has dug before. Father says it will make our fortune. The land is rich, the soil dark and fertile. We shall build a legacy here that will last generations. It was signed Jeremiah Coldwater. At first, I thought it was just a fascinating piece of local history. The Coldwater family had been among the first settlers in this region, arriving from Massachusetts in the early 1830s with dreams of prosperity. They'd established a small farming community around their homestead, complete with the finest well for miles around. Fresh, cold water that never ran dry, even in the harshest droughts. But as I read deeper into the journal, the entries began to change. The tone shifted. What started as optimistic accounts of daily life gradually transformed into something else entirely. The well speaks to us now. Read an entry from October 1836. Not words, you understand, but something deeper. A calling from the depths that makes the very stones hum with anticipation. Father says it's just the wind, but we all know better. The well knows things. It knows our names. I should have stopped reading then. Should have burned that journal and forgotten I ever found it. Instead, I became obsessed. I spent every waking hour poring over Jeremiah's increasingly frantic writings, watching his descent from hopeful settler to something else, something broken. The final entry, dated December 21, 1836, the winter solstice, was barely legible, the handwriting deteriorating into desperate scratches. They all went down, every last one of them. Mother, father, little Sarah, even the hired hands. The well called, and they answered. I tried to stop them. God help me, I tried. But you can't fight what comes from beneath. What's been waiting down there since before time began. I am the last. The well whispers my name now louder each night. Jeremiah, Jeremiah. Soon I will join them. Soon we will all be together in the cold, dark water. Forever. That was it. The journal ended abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers. What had happened to the Coldwater family? The historical records I could find were sparse. Mentions of a small settlement that had simply vanished one winter, leaving behind only empty buildings and an abandoned well. Most authorities assumed the family had moved west or died from disease. No one had looked deeper. But I had to know. I had to see the place for myself. The drive to the old Coldwater property took me through increasingly desolate countryside. Farmhouses became fewer and farther between. The trees grew thicker and more gnarled, and the very air seemed to take on a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching evening. My GPS stopped working about 5 miles out. The screen just went black, as if the technology itself refused to acknowledge where I was heading. I found the place just as the sun was setting. The remains of the Coldwater homestead sat in a clearing surrounded by twisted oak trees that looked far older than they should have been. The house itself was long gone, reduced to a foundation of moss-covered stones and rotting timber. But the well was still there. It stood in what had once been the center of the yard, a circle of carefully fitted stones rising about 3 feet from the ground. A rusty iron grate covered the opening, though several of the bars had corroded away, leaving gaps large enough for a person to squeeze through if they were determined, or compelled, to do so. As I approached, I could hear it immediately. A soft, rhythmic sound that might have been wind passing through the underground chambers, but sounded disturbingly like whispered voices. The temperature seemed to drop with each step I took toward the well, until my breath was visible in small puffs of vapor. I knelt beside the stone rim and peered down through the gaps in the rusted grate. The shaft disappeared into absolute darkness, deeper than my flashlight beam could penetrate. But there was something else down there, something that made my skin crawl and my rational mind recoil in horror. The water was moving, not flowing, but moving with purpose, as if something large and conscious was stirring far below. And as I listened to those whispered voices echoing up from the depths, I began to distinguish individual words. Names called out in the darkness. Jeremiah, Sarah, Edmund. My great-uncle's name, spoken by whatever dwelt in those black waters. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding, but couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet, because now, mixed in with the other names, I heard something new. Something that turned my blood to ice water in my veins. Thomas, Thomas, Thomas. The well knew I was there. The well was calling my name. And God help me, part of me wanted to answer. I should have left that night. Should have driven straight back to Chicago and never looked back. Instead, I found myself setting up camp in the ruins of the Coldwater homestead, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name or resist. The voices from the well had grown quiet as full darkness fell, but I could feel their presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that rhythmic whispering echoing up from the depths, calling names of people long dead, and one name that belonged to the living. Mine. As the hours crawled by, I found myself walking the perimeter of the old settlement by moonlight. The foundations of other buildings were scattered throughout the clearing. A barn, what might have been a general store, several smaller homes. According to the journal, Coldwater Township had been home to nearly 40 people at its peak. Men, women, and children who had come west seeking new lives. All gone. All vanished in a single winter night. I discovered something else as I explored. Other wells. Smaller ones, scattered throughout the settlement like a network of stone sentries. Each one was dry, their openings sealed with heavy iron covers that had been welded shut. But the main well, the Coldwater well, remained open, its grate corroded and broken. Dawn brought no relief from the oppressive atmosphere that hung over the place. If anything, the daylight made everything worse, revealing details I had missed in the darkness. Scratches in the stones around the well's rim, not weathering but deliberate marks made by human fingernails. Deep gouges where desperate hands had clawed at solid rock. I spent the morning searching through the ruins more systematically, looking for anything that might explain what had happened here. In what remained of the main house's basement, I found them. More journals, hidden beneath a collapsed beam and wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture. These weren't written by Jeremiah Coldwater. The handwriting was different, feminine, careful, educated. The first was signed Margaret Coldwater, beloved wife and mother, Jeremiah's wife. Her entries began several months before her husband's. In the summer of 1836, the well water has been doing strange things to the animals. The horses won't drink from it anymore, and the cattle grow agitated whenever we bring them near. Yesterday, I found 3 dead birds floating in the bucket I had drawn up. They showed no signs of injury or disease. They simply appeared to have drowned themselves in the shallow water. Her observations were methodical, scientific even. She documented changes in the local wildlife, unexplained illnesses among the settlers, and most disturbing of all, behavioral changes in the people themselves. Little Sarah has been walking in her sleep again. Last night, I found her standing by the well in her nightgown, staring down into the water. When I called her name, she didn't respond. It was as if she couldn't hear me at all. I had to physically carry her back to the house. This morning, she claimed to have no memory of leaving her bed. The entries grew more frantic as autumn approached. Margaret documented more sleepwalking incidents, not just from Sarah but from other townspeople as well. Men would be found standing around the well in the pre-dawn hours, motionless and unresponsive. Women would disappear from their beds, only to be discovered kneeling by the water's edge, their lips moving in silent conversation with something unseen. But it was Margaret's final entries that made my hands shake as I read them. The water is rising. I don't mean the level in the well. I mean something is coming up from below. We can all feel it now, pressing against the barriers between their world and ours. Jeremiah insists we must stay, that we have too much invested in this place to abandon it. But I see the madness in his eyes, the same madness that has taken hold of so many others. The well owns them now. It owns us all. They speak to us in our dreams. The voices from below. They tell us stories of what lies beneath. Cities of coral and bone, caverns filled with water that has never seen sunlight, inhabitants who gave up air and warmth long ago in exchange for something else, something eternal. They promise us the same gift, if we will only accept their invitation, if we will only come down to them. Tonight is the solstice, the longest night. They have been preparing for this for months, gathering strength, calling to us with increasing intensity. I can feel the pull myself now, a desperate need to go to the well, to peer down into those black depths and see what waits below. Sarah went to them this morning. I found her nightgown by the well's edge, but she was gone. Jeremiah says she is at peace now. He says we will all be at peace soon. The journal ended there, but there were more voices to be heard. I found 6 other diaries hidden throughout the ruins, each telling the same story from a different perspective. The blacksmith, Jonas Mills, wrote of tools that bent themselves toward the well overnight. The schoolteacher, Elizabeth Crane, documented the children's drawings, all depicting the same image: dark figures with impossibly long limbs beckoning from underwater grottos. But it was the final journal that broke something inside me. A child's diary, written in a careful, innocent hand. Dear diary, Mama says I can't visit the well anymore, but I don't understand why. The nice people down there are so lonely. They've been waiting so long for friends. They tell me stories about their city made of shells and bones and beautiful green lights that glow in the dark water. They say if I come down to visit them, I can stay forever and ever, and I'll never be cold or hungry or sad again. That sounds nice, doesn't it? I think I would like that very much. It was signed Sarah Coldwater, age 7. As I read those words, the sun began to set once again, and I realized I had spent the entire day among the ruins without noticing the passage of time. The compulsion to stay was growing stronger. I could feel it pulling at my thoughts, whispering promises of answers, of understanding, of peace. The voices from the well had started again, echoing up through the gathering dusk. But this time they weren't just calling names. This time I could make out words. Come down, Thomas. Come down and see. Come down and understand. Come down and never leave. I found myself standing at the well's edge without remembering how I had gotten there. My hands gripped the rusted iron grate, and I was pulling at it, trying to widen the gaps between the corroded bars. The metal was sharp and cut my palms, but I barely felt the pain. All I could think about was getting down there, into the dark water where the voices waited. I should have run that night, should have abandoned everything and fled to the farthest corner of the earth. Instead, I found myself unable to leave the well's vicinity for more than a few minutes at a time. Every attempt to walk away was met with an overwhelming compulsion to return, to stand at the stone rim and listen to the voices that grew clearer with each passing hour. By dawn, I wasn't alone anymore. The first was an elderly man in a torn suit, standing perfectly still about 20 feet from the well. His eyes were open but unseeing, staring down into the depths with an expression of rapturous anticipation. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. He simply stood there, swaying slightly, as if moved by currents of air that touched no one else. Within hours, there were more. A woman in a faded dress, a middle-aged farmer still wearing his work boots, a teenager whose school backpack lay forgotten at his feet. They came from the surrounding countryside, drawn by the same compulsion that held me captive. They walked through the forest with the steady, purposeful gait of sleepwalkers, emerging from the tree line to take their places around the well. None of them spoke. None of them acknowledged my presence or each other's. They simply stood and waited, their faces turned toward the dark opening in the ground. I tried to leave again, forcing myself to walk toward my car. I made it perhaps 50 yards before the pain started. A crushing agony in my chest that felt like drowning in reverse, as if my lungs were filling with something thicker than air. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, and only when I crawled back toward the well did the sensation ease. The message was clear. I wasn't going anywhere. As the day wore on, more people arrived. I recognized some of them from the nearest town, faces I had seen in the general store or gas station during my drive out here. Others were strangers, but they all shared the same empty, blissful expression, the same patient stillness. By sunset, nearly 30 people surrounded the well, standing in loose concentric circles like worshippers at some ancient shrine. And perhaps that's exactly what they were. That's when I found the final piece of the puzzle: Edmund's journal. My great-uncle had hidden his own account in the one place I hadn't thought to look, inside the well itself, tucked into a niche in the stone wall just below the grate. The pages were damp but readable, protected by the same oilcloth that had preserved the other documents. Edmund's story began in 1952, more than a century after the Coldwater family's disappearance. I came here looking for answers about our family's connection to this place. What I found instead was a truth that should have remained buried. The Coldwaters didn't disappear, they were taken, claimed by something that has existed in these underground waters since before human memory. Something that feeds on more than flesh and blood. It feeds on souls. His entries detailed months of research, of piecing together the full scope of what had happened here. The well wasn't simply a source of water. It was a gateway, a connection point between our world and something vast and alien that dwelt in the flooded caverns far below. The entity or entities down there had been waiting for generations, occasionally drawing people to them, but never in the numbers they truly desired. The Coldwater family had been their first major harvest. 43 people in a single night, all walking willingly into the dark water to join whatever civilization existed in those depths. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. They reproduce through conversion, Edmund wrote. Each person they claim becomes part of their collective consciousness, adding their memories, their knowledge, their connections to the surface world. Over time, they use these connections to call others, family members, friends, anyone with a psychic or emotional tie to those who have already been taken. That explained everything. My connection to this place wasn't random. It was hereditary, passed down through generations of Coldwaters who had escaped the initial harvest. The entity had been calling to our bloodline for decades, waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances. Edmund had tried to resist just as I was trying now. His journal documented his struggle against the compulsion, his attempts to warn others, his growing realization that he was fighting a losing battle. The dreams are getting worse. Every night I see them down there. My ancestors, the original Coldwaters, along with hundreds of others who have been taken over the years. They're not dead, not in any sense we would understand. They've been transformed, adapted for life in the underwater cities. Their bodies changed, elongated, their lungs modified to extract oxygen from water instead of air. They're still conscious, still themselves in many ways, but they're something else too. Something that belongs to the deep. They tell me it doesn't hurt. The transformation, they say it's beautiful, like being born again into a world without pain or fear or loneliness. They say the water is warm once you stop fighting it, that the pressure becomes comforting rather than crushing. They promise me peace, and sometimes, God forgive me, I'm tempted to believe them. The final entry was dated just 3 days before Edmund's death. I can't hold out much longer. The calling is too strong now, and I'm too old and tired to keep fighting. But I've hidden everything I've learned, all the evidence, in places where the right person might find it. Someone young enough and strong enough to break the cycle. I pray that Thomas will prove stronger than the rest of us. I pray he'll find a way to end this before more innocents are lost. If not, if I'm wrong about him, then God help us all. As I finished reading, the sun finally disappeared behind the treeline, and something changed in the atmosphere around the well. The air grew thicker, more oppressive, and I could swear I heard sounds echoing up from the depths. Not just voices now, but movement, splashing, the scrape of something large pulling itself up through water-filled passages. The people surrounding the well began to move, not walking, but swaying in unison, like seaweed in a current. Their mouths opened and closed silently, as if they were practicing breathing underwater. Several of them began removing their clothes with mechanical precision, folding the garments neatly and setting them aside. I tried to scream a warning, tried to break through their trance, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. The compulsion was taking hold of me too, filling my mind with images of the dark cities below, the coral gardens and bone temples, the eternal peace that waited in the embrace of the deep. One by one, the sleepwalkers began climbing over the well's broken grate. I watched in horror as the elderly man in the torn suit squeezed through a gap in the corroded iron and dropped into the darkness below. There was a splash, then silence. The woman in the faded dress followed. Then the farmer. Then the teenager. Each disappearance was met with a sound from below. A welcoming splash, then nothing. No cries for help. No struggles. Just acceptance. And now they were calling to me with voices I recognized. The voices of my ancestors, of everyone who had ever been claimed by the thing in the well. Thomas, come home. Come down to us. Come and see how beautiful it is here in the deep places. Come and be free. My feet began moving toward the well of their own accord. My hands reached for the rusted grate. And part of me, a growing part, wanted nothing more than to answer their call. I fought the compulsion with everything I had, digging my heels into the soft earth, gripping the foundation stones of the ruined house until my knuckles went white. But it was like trying to fight a riptide. The harder I struggled, the more exhausted I became, and the stronger the pull seemed to grow. The remaining sleepwalkers continued their methodical descent into the well, their movements dreamlike and peaceful. Each disappearance was accompanied by those welcoming sounds from below, and with each new arrival in the depths, the voices calling to me grew stronger, more insistent. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Some of the voices were new, recent additions. I could hear the elderly man who had gone down first, his voice joining the chorus that echoed up from the black water. Within minutes, the woman followed suit, then the farmer, their individual tones blending into the collective call of the deep. The transformation was immediate, instantaneous. Whatever process awaited below didn't kill its victims. It converted them, absorbed them into something larger and more ancient than individual human consciousness. I was down to the last few sleepwalkers when salvation came from an unexpected source. My great-uncle Edmund's ghost. I don't say that lightly. I've never believed in ghosts, never put stock in supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. But there was no other way to describe the translucent figure that materialized between me and the well just as I was about to take my final steps toward the edge. "Thomas, stop." His voice was thin as wind through dry leaves, but unmistakably Edmund's. "You're stronger than this. You have to be stronger than this." The compulsion faltered just for a moment, and I found I could think clearly again. The last sleepwalker, a young woman barely out of her teens, was squeezing through the grate, but I managed to grab her ankle and pull her back. She fought me with surprising strength, her fingernails raking across my arms as she tried to reach the opening. But without the collective pull of 30 other people, I was able to hold her, to keep her from joining the thing in the depths. "How?" I gasped, struggling to maintain my grip on both the girl and my own sanity. "How do I fight it?" Edmund's ghost flickered like a candle flame. "The water, it's not just a gateway. It's a prison too. Something's been trapped down there for thousands of years, maybe longer. The Coldwaters thought they were digging a well, but they were really opening a cell." The girl I was holding suddenly went limp, her eyes rolling back in her head. For a moment, I thought she was dead, but then she began to convulse, her body jerking as if she were drowning in air. Foam flecked her lips, and when she opened her mouth, what came out wasn't her voice. "Let her go, surface dweller. She belongs to us now. They all belong to us." The voice was layered, multiple tones speaking in perfect unison, the collective consciousness of everyone who had ever been claimed by the well. Hundreds of voices, maybe thousands, speaking as one. "What are you?" I demanded, though part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. The girl's head lolled toward me, her eyes now completely white. When she smiled, I saw that her teeth had already begun to change, elongating, sharpening, adapting for a diet that had nothing to do with surface food. "We are the deep ones. We are the first children of the waters that covered the earth before land existed. We have been waiting in the dark places, growing in wisdom and number, preparing for the day when the surface world would be ready to join us beneath the waves. The day when we would drag your civilization down to us, one soul at a time." Edmund's ghost moved closer to the well, and I could see the anguish in his spectral features. I tried to warn people, tried to find someone who could end this, but the compulsion, it's too strong. It grows with every person they take. The possessed girl laughed, a sound like water rushing through broken pipes. "You cannot stop what has already begun. Even now, our influence spreads beyond this place. Every person who has heard our call carries a piece of us back to their communities. Every dream we share plants seeds in new minds. Soon, entire cities will walk into the ocean to be with us. Soon, the surface world will be empty, and all of humanity will know the peace of the deep." I looked around the ruins of Coldwater Township and understood the true scope of the horror I was facing. This wasn't just about one cursed well in rural Illinois. This was ground zero for something far more ambitious, a slow-motion invasion that had been in progress for centuries. "How many?" I asked. "How many places like this are there?" Edmund's expression grew even more troubled. "Too many to count. Wells, springs, underground lakes, anywhere there's a connection to the deep water systems." They've been spreading for generations, calling people to them, building their numbers. The girl in my arms started to change more rapidly now. Her skin was taking on a grayish pallor, and when she breathed, I could hear a wet, rattling sound in her chest. The transformation was accelerating. Let her complete the change, the collective voice urged. Let her show you how beautiful it is to be free of the limitations of surface life. No more pain, no more fear, no more loneliness. Only the eternal embrace of the deep. I almost did it. God help me, I almost let her go. The promise of peace was so tempting after the hours of terror and revelation I'd endured. But then I looked at her face, really looked at it, and saw something that broke my heart. Underneath the alien changes, underneath the white eyes and sharpening teeth, she was still there. The real girl, trapped inside her transforming body, aware of what was happening to her but unable to stop it. I could see the terror in her expression, the desperate plea for help. That's when I knew what I had to do. Edmund, I said, never taking my eyes off the girl's face. How do I save her? How do I save any of them? The ghost shook his head sadly. The ones already taken, they're gone, Thomas. The change can't be reversed. But the connection itself, that might be different. If you could find a way to seal it, to cut the link between their world and ours. Impossible. The collective voice hissed through the girl's transformed vocal cords. We are eternal. We are inevitable. We are. I pressed my hand over her mouth, cutting off the alien words. The girl's eyes cleared for just a moment, long enough for her to mouth a single word, please. Then the change completed itself and she was gone. The thing that had been a teenage girl just moments before broke free from my grasp with inhuman strength and scuttled toward the well with movements that were no longer quite human. I didn't try to stop her this time. There was no point. She was already lost. But as I watched her disappear into the dark water below, I made a promise to myself and to the memory of everyone who had been taken by this place. I would find a way to end this. I would find a way to seal the well and cut the connection between the deep ones and our world. Even if it killed me. Edmund's ghost was already fading as the first light of dawn touched the ruins of Coldwater Township. But his final words were clear. The answers you need are in the deep places. But be careful, Thomas. To fight monsters, you risk becoming one yourself. As the sun rose over the abandoned settlement, I stood alone beside the well, listening to the chorus of voices that called from below. Somewhere in that vast underwater realm, 30 more souls had been added to the collective. 30 more voices to spread the infection. But I had something they didn't expect. Knowledge. And with knowledge came the possibility of resistance. The real war was just beginning. The ghost of my great-uncle was gone, but his words echoed in my mind. The answers you need are in the deep places. I stared down into the well's black throat, knowing that what I was contemplating was suicide, but also understanding that it might be the only way to learn how to stop what was happening. I spent the morning preparing, gathering supplies from my car and the ruins around me. Rope, flashlights, the diving equipment I'd brought on a whim, as if some part of me had known this moment would come. I also found something else among Edmund's hidden belongings. A waterproof case containing what looked like old-fashioned diving gear, along with a note in his handwriting. If you're reading this, then you've made the same choice I couldn't bring myself to make. This equipment was used by a government research team in 1963. They were investigating reports of missing persons near underground water systems. Only one man came back, and he spent the rest of his life in an asylum, drawing pictures of underwater cities and speaking languages that didn't exist. His name was Dr. Marcus Webb, and his research notes are in this case. They might help you survive what's down there. Dr. Webb's notes were fragmentary, written in a mixture of scientific observation and barely controlled terror. The tunnels extend far deeper than any natural cave system should. The water is not salt or fresh, but something else entirely. A medium that supports forms of life we never imagined possible. The architecture, God, the architecture, it defies every law of physics I know. Buildings that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Doorways that lead to spaces larger than the structures that contain them. They're not evil exactly. That's what makes it so horrible. They genuinely believe they're offering us a gift, transformation into something better, something eternal. In their minds, individual consciousness is a disease, a cruel joke played by evolution. They see the collective as perfection, and they want to share that perfection with us. I saw them, thousands of them, maybe millions, living in vast cities of coral and bone beneath the earth. They were human once. I could see traces of their original forms in their transformed bodies. Some recent, others so old they've become almost unrecognizable. But they're all still there, all still conscious, all still themselves in some way. Just connected, linked by something deeper than telepathy. The most chilling part of Webb's notes was his description of the Deep One's ultimate plan. This is just the beginning. The wells, the springs, the underground lakes. They're all part of a vast network, a circulatory system that spans the entire planet. They've been building it for millennia, connecting every significant body of water to their realm. When they're ready, when they've gathered enough converts, they'll activate the entire system at once. Every well will sing. Every spring will call. Every underground stream will whisper names. Humanity won't be conquered. We'll walk willingly into the deep places, drawn by the voices of our own transformed loved ones. And once we're there, once we've joined them, we'll understand that this was always meant to be our destiny. I strapped on the diving gear with trembling hands, knowing that I was about to descend into a nightmare that most human minds couldn't comprehend. But I had to see it for myself, had to understand what we were truly fighting. The rope I'd brought was 100 feet long. Probably not enough, but it was all I had. I secured one end to the strongest foundation stone I could find and fed the other end down into the well. The flashlight beam barely penetrated the darkness below, but I could make out the glimmer of water perhaps 30 feet down. As I prepared to lower myself into the opening, something made me pause. A sound from the forest, car engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. I looked up to see a convoy of black SUVs emerging from the tree line, followed by what looked like military personnel in hazmat suits. The government had finally taken notice. A woman in a dark suit stepped out of the lead vehicle, her expression grim but professional. She was flanked by soldiers carrying equipment I didn't recognize. Devices that hummed with electrical energy and seemed to make the air itself shimmer around them. "Mr. Whitmore," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. "I'm Agent Sarah Chun with a classified government division. We need you to step away from the well immediately." "You know what's down there," I said. It wasn't a question. "We've been monitoring locations like this for decades," she replied, moving closer but keeping her distance from the well itself. "We know about the deep ones. We know about the network. And we know that what you're planning won't work." "Then what will work?" I demanded. "How do we stop them?" Agent Chen's expression was sympathetic but firm. "We don't stop them, Mr. Whitmore. We contain them. We've developed technology that can create barriers around these connection points, electromagnetic fields that disrupt their influence. It's not a perfect solution, but it keeps the infection from spreading." I looked around at the soldiers setting up their equipment, at the strange devices they were placing around the well's perimeter. "How long have you known about this?" "Since 1947, she admitted. A research facility in New Mexico broke through into one of their cities by accident. We lost 43 scientists that day. Since then, we've been working to understand and contain the threat. But you haven't found a way to close the connections permanently. No. Every time we try, they adapt. They're learning from us, evolving their methods. Each new generation is harder to contain than the last. I felt a crushing sense of despair settle over me. If the government, with all their resources and decades of research, couldn't find a permanent solution, what hope did one man have? That's when the well began to sing. It started as a low hum, barely audible, but quickly grew in volume and complexity. The sound wasn't coming from the water, it was coming from the stones themselves, as if the entire structure had become some kind of resonating chamber. The soldiers' equipment began sparking and failing, their electromagnetic barriers flickering out of existence one by one. "Fall back!" Agent Chen shouted, but it was already too late. The song was in all of us now, flooding our minds with images of the deep places, with promises of transformation and eternal peace. I watched in horror as several soldiers began walking toward the well, their weapons dropping forgotten from nerveless fingers. But something was different this time. The compulsion wasn't as strong as before, perhaps because I had already been exposed, had already built up some resistance to their influence. I could think clearly enough to act. I grabbed Agent Chen's arm as she swayed toward the well. "The diving gear," I gasped. "I have to go down there. It's the only way to understand how to stop this." She blinked, fighting the mental fog that had descended over the clearing. "You'll die down there. Or worse, you'll become one of them." Maybe, but Dr. Webb survived long enough to bring back information. Maybe I can too. The song from the well was growing louder, more insistent. Around us, more soldiers were succumbing to its call, walking steadily toward the stone rim like sleepwalkers in a nightmare. Agent Chun pulled out some kind of device, a small metal box with blinking lights, and pressed it against her temple. Immediately, her eyes cleared. "Neural disruption field," she explained, offering me a second device. "It won't last long, but it might give you a chance." I strapped the device to my forehead and immediately felt the mental pressure ease. The song was still there, but muted, like hearing music through thick walls. I could think. I could act. "If I don't come back," I started. "You're coming back," she interrupted. "You have to come back. Because if you don't, if you're right about this being the only way to find answers, then we're all lost." I lowered myself into the well, the cold air giving way to something thick and oppressive. The water, when I reached it, was not the clear, cold liquid the Coldwater family had first discovered. It was dark as oil and warm as blood, with a consistency that was almost syrupy. As soon as I submerged, I understood why Dr. Webb had gone mad. The water wasn't water at all, it was some kind of living medium, a substance that teemed with microscopic consciousness. I could feel it pressing against my diving suit, trying to find ways inside, trying to make contact with my skin. Through the murky liquid, I saw lights in the distance, and I began swimming toward them. The tunnel system was vast beyond comprehension. What had seemed like a simple well from the surface was actually the top of a massive vertical shaft that connected to horizontal passages extending in every direction. The lights I was following were bioluminescent, not artificial illumination, but the glow of living organisms that served as both decoration and navigation aids for the inhabitants of this underwater realm. As I swam deeper, following the main passage, I began to encounter them. The deep ones. They moved through the water with fluid grace, their transformed bodies perfectly adapted for this environment. Some were recent conversions, I could still make out human features beneath the changes. Others were ancient, their forms so altered that only their size suggested they had once been human at all. But the most disturbing thing about them was their expressions. They weren't mindless drones or zombie-like creatures. They were aware, intelligent, and genuinely happy. They looked at me with curiosity rather than hostility, and when they spoke, their words somehow carrying clearly through the liquid medium, their voices held nothing but gentle welcome. "Another surface dweller comes to visit," one of them said, gliding closer to examine me. Once she might have been a young woman. Now her elongated limbs ended in webbed fingers. Her eyes had enlarged to capture more light, and gill slits along her neck fluttered with each breath she took from the living water. "You needn't fear, cousin. We know why you've come. To understand," another added, this one so transformed that only its vocal patterns suggested it had once been human. "To see what we have become, and to learn whether it is truly as terrible as your kind believes." They surrounded me but didn't threaten. Instead, they began to guide me through their realm, showing me wonders that defied every law of physics and biology I thought I understood. Cities of coral and bone that extended for miles in every direction. Gardens of sea anemones that sang in harmony with the movement of the currents. Vast libraries where knowledge was stored not in books but in living creatures whose very existence contained entire histories. "This is what awaits your species," my guide explained as we swam through a plaza where hundreds of transformed humans went about their daily lives. Though daily was a meaningless concept in a place where time flowed differently than on the surface. Not extinction but evolution. Not death, but transformation into something greater than what you were. I was shown nurseries where human children, converted young enough to adapt completely, played games that involved manipulating the very structure of water itself. I saw workshops where the deep ones created tools and art from materials that shouldn't have existed, substances that were solid and liquid simultaneously, objects that existed in more dimensions than my eyes could properly perceive. And everywhere I heard the same message. This was paradise. This was the next step in human evolution. This was where we all belonged. But I also saw things my guides didn't want me to focus on. The human converts who had fought the change too long, whose minds had shattered under the stress of transformation. They wandered the edges of the cities like living ghosts, their consciousness fragmented, their humanity lost not to transcendence but to madness. I saw the breeding pits, where the deep ones were creating new forms of life, hybrid creatures designed to survive in both water and air, scouts that could infiltrate surface communities more effectively than the current system of mental compulsion. And I saw the war rooms, where ancient beings that had never been human planned the final phase of their conquest. They had grown tired of the slow conversion process. They were preparing to activate their entire network at once, to sing their song from every well, spring, and underground stream simultaneously. The Great Calling, they called it, and it was scheduled to begin in less than 72 hours. "You cannot stop what has already been set in motion," my guide said as she led me to the edge of their realm, to a place where the water gave way to air-filled chambers that served as meeting points between the two worlds. "But you can choose to be part of it willingly, rather than being forced to participate. Stay with us, Thomas Whitmore. Join your ancestors in the deep places. Know peace." I looked back at the underwater civilization, at the millions of transformed humans who had found happiness in their new existence. For a moment, just a moment, I was tempted. The neural disruption device Agent Chun had given me was failing, its battery dying, and the song of the deep ones was filling my mind once again. But then I thought of the girl I had tried to save, of the terror in her eyes as she felt her humanity slipping away. I thought of the billions of people on the surface who would never get to make a real choice, who would be compelled to walk into the water by voices they couldn't resist. And I thought of Dr. Webb, the one man who had seen this realm and returned to tell the tale, even though it had cost him his sanity. I had to get back. I had to warn them. I had to find a way to stop the Great Calling. The return journey to the surface was a nightmare of failing equipment and growing mental pressure. The neural disruption device Agent Chun had given me was dying, its protective field flickering in and out like a failing light bulb. With each flicker, the song of the deep ones grew stronger in my mind, more seductive, more insistent. Stay with us, Thomas. Your place is here, in the deep places, where you will never know pain or fear again. I fought against the compulsion with everything I had, forcing myself to swim upward through the living water while images of the underwater paradise filled my mind. Part of me, a growing part, wanted to turn around, to descend back into the depths and accept the gift they were offering. When I finally broke the surface of the well, gasping and choking on the alien medium that had filled my lungs, Agent Chun was waiting with a team of medics. They hauled me out of the shaft and immediately began decontamination procedures, washing the strange liquid from my diving suit while monitoring me for signs of transformation. How long was I down there? I asked through chattering teeth. 18 hours, Chun replied grimly. We were about to give up on you. 18 hours. In the deep places it had felt like days, weeks even. Time moved differently down there, flowing according to rules that had nothing to do with the surface world's understanding of causality. Did you find what you were looking for? She asked as the medics checked my vital signs. I looked around the clearing, noting the military equipment that now surrounded the well, more sophisticated than what had been there before, humming with electromagnetic energy that made my teeth ache. But I also noticed something else. The soldiers weren't just guarding the well anymore. They were guarding the entire area, their weapons pointed outward toward the forest. It's starting, isn't it? I said. The great calling. Chen's expression confirmed my fears. 6 hours ago, wells started singing all across the Midwest. Springs in Wisconsin, underground lakes in Michigan, abandoned mines in Pennsylvania. The activity is spreading eastward at about 50 miles per hour. At this rate, the entire continent will be affected within 48 hours. I told her everything I had seen in the depths. The cities, the millions of converted humans, the preparations for the final phase of their plan. As I spoke, I watched her face grow paler and more grim. How many? She asked when I finished. How many of them are there? More than you could imagine. This has been going on for thousands of years, Chun. Every missing person case you've never solved, every unexplained disappearance near a body of water. They've been building their numbers slowly, carefully, waiting for the right moment. She pulled out a tablet and showed me a map of North America. Red dots were scattered across the surface, each one marking a location where the Deep One's song had begun. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, forming an intricate network that spanned the entire continent. We've been tracking the activations, she said. The pattern is deliberate. They're working outward from major population centers, ensuring maximum exposure when they reach the cities. Chicago will be affected within 12 hours. New York and Los Angeles by tomorrow night. I stared at the map in horror, imagining millions of people walking into rivers and lakes, into swimming pools and reservoirs, answering the call of the deep. What's the government's response? Evacuation? Martial law? Chun laughed bitterly. How do you evacuate an entire continent? How do you explain to people that they need to avoid all sources of water because an ancient race of aquatic beings wants to transform them into something inhuman? They'd think we were insane. So what's the plan? We're trying to establish containment zones around the major activation sites, using electromagnetic barriers to disrupt their influence. But we're already losing ground. The song is adapting, evolving to overcome our countermeasures faster than we can develop new ones. That's when I heard it, a low humming that seemed to come from the ground itself. The well behind us was singing again, but this time it wasn't alone. In the distance, carried on the wind, I could hear answering songs from other locations. The network was synchronizing, preparing for the final phase. There might be another way, I said, remembering something I had seen in the depths. The deep ones have a central control system, a place where the eldest among them coordinate the network's activities. If we could disrupt that. You're talking about going back down there, Chen said flatly. Into their stronghold. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's the only chance we have. The control center is located beneath Lake Superior. They've been using it as their primary base of operations for centuries. If I could get there, if I could find a way to destroy or disable their coordination system, the entire network would collapse, she finished. Or it would just regenerate somewhere else. We don't know enough about how their system works to predict the outcome. I was about to respond when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my sister's name, and when I answered, her voice was dreamy, distant. Tommy? Tommy, I just wanted to tell you, I'm going for a swim. There's this beautiful lake near my house, and it's calling to me. The water looks so peaceful, so welcoming. I think I'm going to stay for a while. The line went dead. My sister lived in Minneapolis. According to the map, that area should have been affected hours ago. It's too late, I said, the full scope of the disaster finally hitting me. They're not just calling people to the original sites. They're using the converts to activate new locations, everywhere there's significant water. Municipal supplies, private wells, even bathtubs and swimming pools. Chun was already on her radio, coordinating with teams across the country. But I could see in her eyes that she knew what I knew. We had underestimated the scope of their network. This wasn't just an invasion. It was a complete transformation of the planet's relationship with water itself. The humming around us was growing louder, more complex. Other voices were joining the chorus, human voices, recent converts adding their songs to the symphony. I recognized some of them. The soldiers who had succumbed earlier, the people from town who had answered the call. And somewhere in that growing chorus, I heard my sister's voice. We need to move, I said, forcing myself to focus on what could still be done. If there's any chance of stopping this, we need to reach Lake Superior before they complete the synchronization. Chun nodded grimly. I've got a helicopter standing by. But Thomas, you know this is probably a one-way trip. Even if you succeed in disrupting their control center, the chances of you making it back to the surface. I know, I said. But what else can we do? Let them have the entire human race. As we prepared to leave Coldwater Township, I took one last look at the well that had started everything. The stone rim was glowing now, not with artificial light but with some kind of bioluminescent energy that pulsed in rhythm with the song. The water far below was no longer dark. It was alive with movement, with purpose, with the anticipation of creatures that had waited eons for this moment. The great calling had begun. Across the continent, across the world, humanity was answering the song of the deep. And I was probably the only person left who both understood what was happening and was still free enough to act. The helicopter was waiting for us at the edge of the clearing, its rotors already spinning. As we lifted off, I could see the lights beginning to appear in the forest below. More people, more converts, walking through the darkness toward the wells and springs that dotted the landscape. The war for the surface world had begun, and we were already losing. But I had seen the heart of their operation. I knew where their weakness lay, and if I could reach Lake Superior, if I could find their control center and somehow disable it, there might still be hope, even if it cost me everything. Lake Superior stretched out below us like a dark mirror, its surface reflecting the storm clouds that had been gathering all afternoon. But as our helicopter descended toward the coordinates I had given Chun, I could see that the water was different here. It moved with purpose, forming patterns that had nothing to do with wind or current. Spiral formations that pulsed with bioluminescent light. geometries that hurt to look at directly. There, I said, pointing to a section of lake where the water seemed to be flowing upward instead of lying flat. That's where we need to go. Chun checked her instruments with growing alarm. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's been active for a very long time. Through the helicopter's windows, I could see the shoreline dotted with figures walking into the water. Thousands of people from Duluth and Superior, from small towns and fishing communities, all answering the call that now echoed across the continent. They walked with peaceful expressions, their movements synchronized, like dancers performing a choreographed routine. The conversion rate is accelerating, Chin observed, studying her tablet. Initial exposure leads to mental compulsion within minutes. Full physical transformation takes place within hours of submersion. At this rate, every major population center will be affected by tomorrow morning. I thought of my sister, of the dreamlike quality in her voice during our last conversation. She was down there somewhere, in one of their underwater cities, already beginning the change that would make her something other than human. The thought should have filled me with despair, but instead I felt a strange kind of peace. If I failed in what I was about to attempt, at least I would see her again. The helicopter touched down on a rocky outcropping about a mile from shore. Chen's team immediately began setting up their equipment, electromagnetic generators, communication arrays, and something they called a neural anchor, a device designed to keep me tethered to surface-level consciousness while I was in the depths. The anchor has a range of about 2 miles, Chin explained as she helped me into the diving gear. Beyond that, you'll be on your own. The good news is that the equipment includes a localized EMP device. If you can get close enough to their control center, you should be able to disrupt their coordination systems. And the bad news? The EMP will also fry all your equipment, including your air supply and the neural anchor. Once you activate it, there's no coming back. I nodded, having already accepted that this was a suicide mission. The only question was whether my sacrifice would accomplish anything meaningful. As I prepared to enter the water, Chun grabbed my arm. Thomas, there's something else you should know. We've been monitoring communications from other government installations around the world. This isn't just happening in North America. Similar activation events have been reported in Europe, Asia, Australia. This is global. How global? Every continent, every major body of water. It's as if they've been planning this for centuries, building a worldwide network of connection points. Even if you succeed in disrupting their North American operations, there are millions of them in other locations. I felt the weight of that revelation settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Even if I succeeded, even if I managed to shut down the Lake Superior Control Center, it would be nothing more than a temporary setback. A small victory in an unwinnable war. But then I thought about Dr. Webb, about his final notes describing the Deep One's ultimate plan. They weren't just trying to convert humanity, they were trying to merge our entire civilization with theirs, to create something hybrid and unprecedented. If their coordination was disrupted at a critical moment, if the synchronization failed, maybe the entire network would collapse. Maybe their grand design would unravel. Or maybe I was just grasping at straws, looking for hope in a hopeless situation. The water was warm when I entered it, far warmer than Lake Superior should have been even in summer. It felt alive against my skin, pressing through the diving suit's fabric with an intimacy that made my flesh crawl. As I descended, following the coordinates burned into my memory from the deep vision, I began to see lights in the darkness below. But these weren't the gentle bioluminescent guides I had encountered at the Coldwater site. These lights were harsh, alien, pulsing with energy that made my equipment malfunction and my vision blur. I was approaching something far more ancient and powerful than the regional processing center I had visited before. The architecture, when I finally reached it, defied every law of physics I thought I understood. Buildings that folded in on themselves, passages that led to spaces larger than the structures containing them, chambers where water and air existed in the same location without mixing. This was the heart of their civilization, the place where the eldest deep ones had been planning humanity's transformation for millennia. And they were waiting for me. "Welcome, Thomas Whitmore," came the collective voice, speaking directly into my mind without need for words or water to carry the sound. "We have been expecting you." The figures that emerged from the twisted architecture were barely recognizable as having ever been human. These were the first converts, being so ancient and transformed that they had become something entirely new. Their bodies flowed like liquid, reshaping themselves as needed, while their minds touched mine with an intelligence that spanned centuries. "You have seen our cities. You have witnessed our gift. Yet still you resist. Why do you cling to the pain and isolation of individual existence when we offer you connection, peace, eternal belonging? Because you're taking away choice?" I said, my voice carrying strangely through the alien medium that surrounded us. "You're forcing transformation on people who never asked for it." Choice? The concept seemed to amuse them. "Your species chose long ago, when your ancestors first began polluting your world's waters, when they began destroying the delicate balance that had existed for millions of years. We are not conquerors, Thomas Whitmore. We are the cure for a disease called individual consciousness. We are the solution to the problem of human loneliness." They showed me visions then, not of their underwater paradise, but of the surface world as they saw it. Humanity isolated from itself and from nature, each person trapped in their own private hell of separation and fear. Wars fought over resources that could be shared. Environmental destruction driven by the inability to think beyond individual needs. Mental illness, addiction, violence, all symptoms of a consciousness that had evolved to divide rather than unite. "This is what you fight to preserve," they said. "This is what you would condemn your species to continue suffering. We offer healing, Thomas. We offer an end to the pain." "You offer slavery," I replied, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed my own words anymore. The neural anchor was failing, its protective field weakening under the assault of their collective consciousness. I could feel my resistance crumbling, my individual identity beginning to dissolve into something larger and more connected. And part of me welcomed it. Show him came a new voice, older and more powerful than the others. Show him what his sister has become. She emerged from the depths of the structure like a vision from a dream. My sister, but transformed, perfected. The painful shyness that had always haunted her was gone, replaced by serene confidence. The chronic depression that had plagued her for years had vanished, her face now radiant with genuine happiness. "Tommy," she said, her voice carrying all the love and warmth I remembered from our childhood, but without the edge of sadness that had always been there. "I'm so glad you came. I want you to see what we've become. I want you to understand that this isn't death. It's rebirth." She moved through the water with impossible grace, her transformed body perfectly adapted to this environment while somehow still recognizably her. When she touched my face with webbed fingers, I felt no revulsion, only a profound sense of connection. "Join us, Tommy. Join me. Let go of the burden of being alone." I looked around at the vast control center, at the millions of lights that represented connection points across the globe, at the ancient beings who had orchestrated this transformation with patience and care. They weren't monsters. They were gardeners, tending to what they saw as humanity's natural evolution. The EMP device hung heavy in my hand, its activation switch just a finger's pressure away. One small movement and I could disrupt their coordination, perhaps save millions of people from transformation. But save them for what? For a return to isolation, to the grinding loneliness of individual existence? For continued environmental destruction and endless conflict? My sister's hand was still on my face, and through her touch, I could feel the vast network of consciousness that connected all the converted humans. Millions of minds linked in perfect harmony, sharing every joy and eliminating every sorrow. No one was alone. No one was abandoned. No one suffered the crushing weight of existing as a single, isolated consciousness in an indifferent universe. Choose, the collective voice whispered, but choose knowing what you're truly choosing between. Choose between connection and isolation, between healing and continued suffering, between evolution and stagnation. I thought of Agent Chun on the surface, probably already losing her battle against the spreading influence. I thought of the billions of people who would soon face the same choice I was facing now. And I thought of the world we were leaving behind. A world of environmental destruction, endless wars, and souls crying out in the darkness for connection that never came. My finger hovered over the activation switch. And in that moment of perfect clarity, I finally understood what I had to do. The electromagnetic pulse erupted outward like a shock wave of pure energy, racing through the water and into the network of connections that spanned the globe. I felt the ancient control. Systems failing, the coordination breaking down, the carefully orchestrated transformation grinding to a halt. But I also felt something else. The collective scream of millions of minds suddenly cut off from each other, thrust back into the isolation of individual existence. My sister's face, twisted with grief and loss as the connection that had given her such peace was severed. The despair of countless beings who had found paradise and now watched it crumble. The water around me began to churn as the Deep One city collapsed, its impossible architecture failing without the energy that had sustained it. I was pulled downward, deeper into the lake, as the very foundations of their civilization came apart. But even as I drowned, even as my lungs filled with the alien medium and my consciousness began to fade, I could hear new songs beginning. Smaller songs, individual voices calling out from isolated wells and springs, trying to rebuild what I had destroyed. The network was broken but not dead. And as the darkness claimed me, I wondered if I had saved humanity or merely postponed its transformation into something better than what we were. I wondered if I had made the right choice at all. The last thing I heard was my sister's voice, calling my name across the vast distances between us, filled with a loneliness I had condemned her to carry for the rest of her life. Tommy, Tommy, why did you leave me alone? Then there was only darkness, and the crushing weight of water, and the knowledge that some choices can never be undone.